Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Yes, you're welcome along to Wednesday night rugby. Pro 14 semi-finals ahead of us. Friday night lights at the Aviva Stadium. We'll have Leinster against Munster, and then on Saturday at Murrayfield we will have Ulster, who need to get things going a bit there, against Edinburgh. Keith Wood and the Irish Independent's Ruaidhri O'Connor are with us. Gents, you're very welcome. Rory, we should start with the news though of the new Heineken Champions Cup format for next season only, as a result of the pandemic and the cancellation of the top 14 and the shortened Pro 14 season. 24 teams are in, which means Connacht are in for starters.
Yeah, that's the main headline from an Irish point of view. I think, it's been coming. I think we all expected it, but it is a vastly different looking tournament next season. Partly due to the fact that there's a big international tournament being wedged into the middle of the season. We're starting later, and there's only a finite number of weekends. So it's the Champions Cup that unfortunately has suffered in terms of weekends. So it's quite convoluted, and I don't think it's going to make for great radio. But as quickly as I can, it's basically the top two teams, and the winners this weekend will be in Tier 1. Then it'll go from there to 4 tiers, and then the Tier 1 teams will play against Tier 4 teams from other countries. And it all goes into an overall table. It's kind of NFL style almost, in the fact that you're playing teams that you're not necessarily competing against. It's very unfamiliar to what we've been used to. It's a little bit overcomplicated. But what it will lead to is two-legged quarterfinals, which will be very different in April. So it's they've kind of had to come up with a solution. They've come up with quite a complex and what looks like a pretty overcomplicated structure. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it runs and how the fairness of it all will work out. If you're a Tier 1 team and you're drawn against 3 teams that are stronger than others, it's going to be it's pretty hard to explain in a short period of time, and I think it's going to be quite hard to follow when it actually happens in a couple of months' time as well. Yeah, certainly the group stages are a touch more complicated. So in effect, 2 groups of 12, and there will be 4 group games and not the usual 6 that we'd become accustomed to. So 4 group games. As you said, home and away quarterfinals really catch the eye. Semi-finals still a one-off game. The final in Marseille, hopefully next May 22nd. So the tournament will take 8 weekends in total. To use, say, Leinster as a likely example, say they go on and win the Pro 14, they'll be a Tier 1 team. So 8 teams from the Pro 14 will go in, 8 teams from the top 14, 8 teams from the Premiership. So if you're a top-tier Pro 14 team, the top 2 teams in the Pro 14 of the 8 will be Tier 1. The next 2, teams 3 and 4, will be Tier 2. The next 2 will be Tier 3, and the bottom 2, Tier 4. So Tier 1 will play Tier 4. If you're, for instance, Leinster in Tier 1, you will play the 4th tier from the Pro 14, but no domestic games, the 4th tier from the top 14, and the 4th tier from the Premiership. So to be in Tier 1 is a massive advantage. You're playing the 4th tier all the way through. Tier 1 plays Tier 4. Tiers 2 and 3 go off against each other somewhere in the middle, and we'll have 2-legged quarterfinals, which, like I said, catches the eye. Keith, as a solution of sorts, it doesn't look like a terrible one, far from it.
No, I think it's a decent solution. I think it's a little bit wordy in its explanation, because there's a little bit of confusion within it, because is it really 2 pools, or is it kind of like a lot more pools than that? But it's meritocracy based. So if you have done very well in the previous season, you're the champion or second runner-up, you get an easier run of it. And that's, to be honest, I think this is an elite competition. That's what you want to have, are the best teams at the top. But you do have an opportunity for other teams to do well. But they're going to have to. Is it home and away in the pool as well? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you do get an opportunity to play at home, and an awful lot of teams that would be at the sort of 7 or 8 in a league have a very good home record. So that can make it really awkward. So look, I think it's fair. I think it seems to be smaller. It's only, they say it's only 1 weekend smaller in real terms. But I like the idea that we're having something that isn't an add-on of games, and it's something, it's great to see this as a test and to see how it actually functions, and could it be something that happens in the years afterwards, because I think if we go back to conversations we've had, Joe, over whether there was a British and Irish League or whether there was something else like that, it would need a revamped European Cup anyway, and this is what this is. So it may be the start of something else too, but the big bonuses for us are the Connacht fit into it as well, so that they'll be in it next year. We have 4 teams in it, which puts us in a very strong position for quality rugby throughout the island.
I think as well, Rory, if there's been a weakness to the competition of late, maybe the group stages have dragged on a touch in certain quarters, especially when teams are out of it early. To have 2 fewer group games and get into quarterfinals and have home and away. Sometimes an away draw in the quarterfinal in France or somewhere difficult seems like too much of a disadvantage. Rugby more so than soccer has really held on to this home and away thing as it just seems to count for so much. So I think home and away quarterfinals really intriguing.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how it works. I suppose the score differences can be quite big in rugby. Like over 2 legs, aggregate is not something that's really been. I can't remember the last aggregate game. Maybe there was a rugby league, rugby union crossover in the 90s that had. I think they played 1 game in rugby league and 1 game in rugby union. I think it was Bath against Wigan, and it was over 2 legs. I think the Challenge Cup may have tried it a couple of times back when it was called the Parker Pen Shield. But it's a long time since it's been used, and I think maybe football matches generally, they're generally not blowouts to the same extent, whereas a rugby match can really get away from you. I guess that'll reward the team. I don't know. It's so unfamiliar, but it's worth trying. And I suppose if COVID gives us one thing, it's the chance to try some new things and to look at everything very differently, and that is an opportunity. And if it works and it brings about more excitement, and if this jostling for position across a ladder of 12 teams rather than the way the pool stages has been, and you're right, it has been a bit. I just think the disparity between the best teams and the worst teams has gotten bigger in rugby in the last couple of years. So it's gotten, I still think the cream will rise, but I'm open to any format changes. I'd like them to be less complicated personally, but that's only because I have to explain them on radio stations sometimes, and I'm not very good at that. But it's, I think it can probably be better than this, but it maybe is a step, as Keith said, to something that will reinvigorate the tournament, which has since the big change a couple of years ago probably doesn't command the same level of attention as it used to.
I guess in effect, Keith, you're looking at, for instance, Leinster Saracens over 2 legs as opposed to an extra group game, and for me, I'll take the former.
I think that's right too. There were at the start of professionalism for a while, there was the relegation playoff, or the winner of the first division played the Premiership bottom team over 2 legs. That happened for a while. Economically, it's quite interesting, because if you're a team that isn't a very, very big team and you're one of the T4 teams, you're going to get a home tie against one of the really, really big teams. That's going to be a sellout. So that's one of the guarantees that you have. The quarterfinals will be incredibly they'll be incredibly tough encounters, because you're looking to see, will it be the top 8 teams from the 3 leagues that get to the quarterfinals that they're then playing off, and some of the problems of the Heineken Cup over the last number of years, actually on both formats, were if you were in a group with a very poor team, or with a team from France that didn't take it very seriously, you could top that group and very, very easily. It's pretty unfair. This seems to be tough all out, to be honest, because every team, the number 8 team in any of the leagues, will want to go to the Heineken Cup and will want to do well in it.
Let's look ahead to the semi-finals then in the Pro 14. Leinster, Munster on Friday night, and Ulster away to Edinburgh on the Saturday. By the by, Rory, if we're talking about making the best of situations and coming up with formats which work, I think the Pro 14 deserve a bit of credit here. This has worked very well, I think. Everybody's interested in interpros and domestic derbies. They've been 2 nice games, 2 nice weekends, and now we're into the semi-finals. It's neat, it's tidy. It's not ideal, but I think they happened upon a very good solution, in fairness to them.
Yeah, and they haven't been flogging the players in the same way they have done in England, where that's resulted in, they've had a couple of decent games in the Premiership, but there's been a lot of blowouts because the squads aren't deep enough. They're trying to run off all their games. The Pro 14 were realistic. Obviously, they have more challenges in terms of borders, and they said, right, let's just have 2 rounds of in-country games to prove we can do it, and then we move into the knockouts. I think they got a little bit lucky in that Ulster and Edinburgh are from the same jurisdiction, so don't have the quarantining problems that maybe might come up next week for the final, or need to be waved away, or they have challenge they have to get over. But no, it has worked, and it's. I mean, last weekend was a bit more like a normal Pro 14 weekend, and often the last round of Pro 14 fixtures before the knockouts is not that inspiring. So, and it kind of saw it like they were fairly. We kind of knew who the quarterfinal or semi-finalists would be towards the end. But it's been a pretty good product. The games have been exciting, they've been interesting, and it's set up for a really, really good, intriguing round of semi-finals with plenty of plot lines to get stuck into.
Yeah, there's loads to talk about. I mean, Friday's particularly intriguing, Keith, for many reasons. Obviously, it's knockout and it's Leinster, Munster and all of those things. But you have Leinster cruising. They've used 38 odd players in the 2 games. They've had 2 different starting 15s. I think their winning record is, 21 games in a row. And they're up against Munster, who weren't that far away 10 days ago or so. Munster have a 5-day turnaround, but crucially, this is it. It's win or bust. I mean, physically, they are going to throw the kitchen sink here at Leinster. Their need is greater.
Their need is the same.
Do you not think it's much greater? I mean, for Leinster have bigger fish to fry. If they lose this, it's a hiccup. I mean, Munster's whole season is over here if they don't win this, no?
It was funny, I had a long conversation with Martin Johnson last week, and he was talking about the when you're winning all the time, that it becomes, which is a rare thing for, we don't get to say that too often, but Leinster have, that it becomes very difficult to hold on and to keep winning and to keep winning and to keep winning as the team changes. I've just noticed on the Leinster side, partly because the vast majority of the players are homegrown, that drive is still there. So I would think that all the players that are in there, we can often think of Leinster being a team, but there's been a huge amount of new players that have come in over the last 2, 3, 4 years, and they've had a taste of it, but they want more. So I think it's the same call when you get to a semi-final. So you're not going to say, we're used to winning these semi-finals and we have a bigger one that we want to win in a few weeks' time. Will they take it any easier? They won't at all, Joe. I just don't see it. I mean, it's huge for almost the history of Munster, and the fact that they have a fairly large losing record against Leinster, that they will want to rectify that, but they want to win silverware. So physically and mentally for this game, there are no excuses. And you can talk about 5-day turnaround, and I hope nobody talks about it, because that is just the reality of what they have to deal with. They need to go out and tinker with their game a little, change it to try and find a couple of more holes in Leinster's defence, because I thought they played really, really well. And I thought they got a bit of a shock when some of their players went off injured, so they had to react accordingly. And I thought they went about the game last weekend with sort of quiet efficiency, without fully setting the world alight. I think they need more in their armoury for Friday, but I actually think that they have a really good chance of upsetting Leinster's dreams of this year of a double, because I do think there is a change. There's subtle changes to Munster. They're playing a bit better, from some of the stop-start earlier on in the season. It's very hard to kind of even discuss it in that fashion, because they've only played 2 matches with it. But those 2 matches were to get to this match. So, and same for Leinster, actually. Leinster's 2 matches were to get to this point where they're at the business end of cup competitions. So I actually think it's going to be enthralling. I've enjoyed all the matches over the last 2 weeks for different reasons, and I had very little of expectation for any of them because of the layoff. But some of the quality has been fantastic. Some of the players aren't hitting the standards that they were earlier on, and that's for a variety of different reasons. But I just think it's set up as being one of those great games. And will it damage Munster if they don't get there? I think it will, but I think they'll get over it to try and do it again next year. And they've no right to win it just because they haven't won against Leinster for a while.
Their record against Leinster is 1 in 8, so we're going back over quite a while now, and it's 1 in 8, and they've lost their last 2 semi-finals in the Pro 14 to Leinster. It was something that Graham Rowntree was asked about. Have a listen.
Does it have a different feel? No, it's knockout rugby, isn't it? Against the team. I mean, they had the luxury of resting guys at the weekend, and they'll have had a good hit out yesterday, which we weren't able to do. But we crack on with it. I'm happy with where we are mentally and physically at the moment going into this game. We've played against them enough, and previous form means nothing to me or this team. Going into this game means nothing. All I'm really stressing to the guys is how hardened we are going into this game. Given not played rugby for a long time, very quickly we're battle and match ready going into a huge game. We've got to be better across the board against the current champions. And we've had 2 games now to get used to what's going on in the breakdown. So I expect us to be better there, more clinical there, not shell as many penalties as we did on Sunday in the breakdown. So, there's wholesome areas for us to be better at, but I'm confident that we're going in the right way.
Keith, you've been in, say, Irish sides, for instance, that routinely lost against certain sides, and logically Graham Rowntree is right. I mean, the past should have no real bearing on what's about to happen, and yet it's hard not to think a record of 1 in 8 against Leinster doesn't come with some kind of psychological baggage or become an extra obstacle of sorts. What was your experience of having very bad records against certain teams?
I had some really horrendous records. I remember being in a press conference in, I would say, 97, where we had 6 new first caps playing against the All Blacks, and in the press conference on the Friday I said we probably had a 25-1 chance of beating them, since we'd never beaten them before, and this is an incredibly young team. And people were saying afterwards that was very negative. But I was taking the one chance. I wasn't being negative at all. I said there is a chance there for us. And we went out and we played, and we were pretty good in the first half, and we fell away at the end of it. But we started to believe that actually, that you can beat them. So I was very, well, can't say that no player thinks about it, but some players may get burdened by it. But I don't think you can look at a team and say they're burdened by it. The team has to say and go into every game saying, yeah, they're a better team than we are maybe. On their day, they can be better than we are. Our job is to make certain that they're not on their day, that we can destabilise them wherever we possibly can, that we take every chance that we can, that we have that sense of discipline that you have to go out and win it. And sometimes that's all you have. You have to take every chance and keep your discipline. And that can be enough. I don't think it's enough against Leinster. I think we need to create more than we have done. And I'd like to see us play at a slightly faster tempo. And if that happens, I think there's a risk to that, because if the higher tempo means your error rate goes up, that might open more opportunities for Leinster. But I think that's the risk Munster have to take. And look, there's days when you're playing against a better team, but you don't go out with a view that you're going to lose, and you go out with a view to say, what is there possible that I can turn into my favour or into our team's favour to make this be possible for us? And I don't think there's such a huge gap between them. I think Leinster have a phenomenal squad, really, really great squad. A lot of great young guys coming through who seem to step up very, very quickly and easily, and they're the envy of all teams in the Northern Hemisphere, to be honest, with that strength and depth. But I still think you can beat them. And Munster's view is that they have to be able to, and they have to not give up easy scores. So the one difference I felt, critical difference 2 weeks ago, was that it was very hard for Munster to score. And it was easier for Leinster to score. So Munster have to be really, really meagre in defence. They have to let nothing go through, no easy scores, no easy penalties.
Certain aspects of Munster's game worked really well against Leinster, Rory. Like, line-out has been very strong. They won all 13 of their own line-outs against Leinster. They stole 3, and they were 100% again off their own line-out against Connacht. They had 22 from 22. And at the breakdown, they've been very good as well. Even CJ Stander on his own had 4 penalty turnovers against Leinster. So there are certainly aspects of their play they can be very happy with and feel good about going into Friday. If you had to boil down the concern, it probably is the point Keith made and quite a few people have made. It looks a much more difficult task for them to score tries than it does for Leinster.
It's got to be a big concern to them that they threw so much at Leinster 2 weeks ago and did so much right and undermined so many key facets of Leinster's game really well. Like, they beat them in the air, both in play and out of touch. They they won the breakdown battle, and yet they still lost the game, albeit by 2 points after a missed conversion that was a very difficult kick. And they kind of, you were catching Leinster a little bit cold. They hadn't played in the same amount of time as Munster. You would imagine Leinster will have learned an awful lot from that game, and I'm not sure how much room for growth Munster will have from that performance. I think Munster threw an awful lot at Leinster 2 weeks ago, and still went on sitting on that bus going home. They had that familiar feeling, and just even thinking about those the semi-final record. I mean, the last 2 years Leinster have been coming into this game off the back of the first year they'd won the Heineken Champions Cup in Bilbao, and last year they were coming back off the game in Newcastle, and they're both the following weekends, and they rotated heavily. They started Ross Byrne last year, if I remember correctly. He may have even started the year before, I can't remember exactly, but the first one was a very tight game. Max Deegan got a turnover in the last minute, but Leinster won, and I think it was more comfortable last year. But Leinster were able to rotate heavily and still win the game, and this year they don't have to do that. They've been the team that's been able to rest up and have Graham Rowntree mentioned training on Monday. They trained fully with this team on Friday with Munster in mind, so they've been focusing on this game from further out as well. So I'm reminded a little bit of after the 2013 Pro 14 final. It was probably the Pro 12 back then. Johan Muller had just played his last game, and he was asked about kind of his legacy and his time with Ulster. And he was kind of one of these great statesmen-like captains from South Africa, and he just kind of smiled and he said, we could have done a lot here. We've done a lot here. We've brought this team on. I'm just unfortunate that my time at Ulster came at the same time that Leinster had this team. And Leinster have a different team now, but I would say Peter O'Mahony, Conor Murray, Keith Earls, CJ Stander, Dave Kilcoyne will all have kind of similar feelings about Leinster, that albeit they haven't gone as close as Ulster, they haven't been to a European final, they haven't been to as many Pro 14 finals as that Ulster team. They kind of find their route to the top blocked by their nearest rivals, who are just, even though they've transformed in the intervening period, are still the best team out there. And at full strength, I find it very difficult to see how Munster beat them.
It'd be interesting to see if Jordan Larmour is thrown back in at 15, Keith. Munster targeted on the last day with some degree of success as well. Rob Kearney was his usual efficient self under the high ball in the most recent game.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see. I thought Larmour was exposed, not just because he's not as tall as Rob Kearney, but because it was almost as if his players didn't entirely trust him. They were in his way for him to get up to the ball, and they were protecting him as well. And that could be just because they've been out of the game. I wonder how many kicks have been landed on the fullbacks in the last few weeks, in training. So that's kind of part and parcel of it. He's a good player who has been very good on the wing, and that was it wasn't his first outing, but it was first outing when it looked like that was going to be his jersey to fill for the next number of years with Leinster and Ireland, and it didn't go as well for him. But like all the players that you're talking about, I don't think any of them have nailed on their Irish jerseys on the back of the performances over the last 2 weeks, but I don't think they've lost it either. So I still think we're waiting and seeing players trying to get in and their head around actually playing rugby again. So I'm not so quick to bring out the long knives just yet on different people. But for Rob Kearney, then, of course, he comes on at the weekend and is just the most comfortable goalie of all time. So life is simpler, but you at some stage you have to make a view towards the future.
Delande and Farrell, Rory, against Ringrose and Henshaw will be, again, well worth watching on Friday night. Kieran Frawley, though, I know you wanted to touch on him. He was man of the match at 12, and we've obviously seen him do his stuff at out half for the last couple of years. I'm right in saying Conor O'Brien, I think, is injured. So beyond Robbie Henshaw, is Frawley now potentially next man in at 12 for Leinster, or is there someone obvious I'm not thinking of here?
Well, Joe Tamani left at the end of last season as well, so there is a bit of a vacancy there. They lost Noel Reid to Leicester the previous season, so he had been their kind of stand-in 12. Rory O'Loughlin can play 12 and 13, but I think they're lining Frawley up as a 12 who can play 10 over the next while. And I think he's a very different player to both Conor O'Brien and Robbie Henshaw, both very direct players. And I thought he gave Leinster a different dimension at the weekend that's going to be quite hard to ignore if he keeps replicating that performance. I thought the way he kind of doubled up with Ross Byrne, was excellent. The way he stepped in to play 10, I thought they just looked like they always look like a really slick team. And I'm not entirely like Johnny Sexton's done it before with Owen Farrell. I'd love to see in a big game him come in and do it. I don't think he's going to displace Robbie Henshaw this weekend. But if I was Robbie Henshaw, I'd be getting a little bit worried about the prospect of Leinster turning more towards having a second playmaker, because it really opens up the way that Leinster can play the game. And I think if either Henshaw or Ringrose goes down in the next little while, and look, they're going to be on Ireland duty for a long time, so Frawley will get a lot of time in the jersey if he stays fit. I think the opportunity will be there. Just to touch on the other debate, I mean, I asked Lancaster about whether, I think as a journalist, I'd love Rob Kearney to come in for his final 3 or 4 games for Leinster and, change the whole thing, and it'd be a great story. But I did ask Lancaster on Monday about it. He did quite heavily big up Hugo Keenan. There is a vacancy there for Dave Kearney, who's injured, so the option is there to switch Lambert to 14 and start Rob Kearney at 15. But he did. They like Hugo Keenan, and they were quite happy with how he went to 14 at the weekend. So I'd be interested to see. I think, like, you're seeing people like Hugo Keenan, like Will Connors, I think is pushing big time for a 7th shirt, and Frawley did himself absolutely no harm at all when it comes to this weekend. Last weekend, if your whole thing is that you pick on form and players play that well against Ulster, having not gone brilliantly against Munster but won a week previously, it's going to be interesting to see if they back any of those guys this weekend.
If we're talking options then, so Frawley at centre, another area I wanted to touch on with you, Rory, is Leinster's back row. I mean, if you get any rugby fan at the moment and say, name all of Leinster's back row players, there is a fair chance they'll forget someone brilliant. There are just that many of them. Are they going to be able to keep all of these guys happy, notwithstanding the fact that this is one of the more attritional areas of the field?
They seem to be able to do that, and I'd love to hear Keith's insight into how a player who's as good as, say, Will Connors coming through. He's obviously a coming man, but Dan Levy is possibly going to miss out this weekend. Obviously coming back off a massive injury. But if you think that the starting 7s last weekend, Will Connors was playing for Leinster. He went to Clongowes. Jordy Murphy, I think, was starting for Ulster. He's Blackrock. Conor Oliver is started for Connacht. He's Blackrock by Askerries. And Munster had a guy from South Africa, Chris Clute. And then Leinster have 4 absolute quality open sides. Levy, Van der Fleer, Connors would have been capped for during the Six Nations if it had continued. You're talking about leaving out 2. And Scott Penny, who's the coming man. I think we all, after the World Cup, were looking for him to make a big breakthrough, and he's had some opportunity this year, but not as much as maybe he would have wanted. I think Rhys Ruddock and Dan Levy are probably not going to be involved this weekend. Like, very few clubs in Europe could afford to leave players of that calibre out. That's if they go with a 6-2 split. If they don't go with a 6-2 split, then Max Deegan might miss out. He's another Ireland international. I mean, picking the right 3 is a big challenge for Lancaster and Cullen this week, and Connors brings an awful lot of what you need against Munster in terms of his ability to both chop tackle but also dominant tackle as well. But if you put him in, you lose Van der Fleer's energy, and against a team on a 5-day turnaround, you might regret that. So it's a really tough thing to do when players are that good and they're all playing that well. Like, Josh Murphy was very good last weekend, and he's probably hasn't got a sniff this week. It's keeping that balancing act of keeping those players happy. It must be very tricky, but they seem to manage it quite well.
Yeah, I think they've managed it because people have been injured. And that's part of the attritional nature of the game, is that so many players are injured all the time. But for me, Will Connors is the most destructive 7 around at the moment. I think he plays particularly well. He looks big, strong, confident. I haven't seen a huge amount of him with the ball in his hand, so it offers a high level of balance for some of the other players. And look, for me, I keep saying it time and time again, I like Max Deegan because of the particular type of athleticism he has. So, look, they can mix and match in whatever way they want and play any game in whichever way they want.
Yeah, it's a high-class problem. Munster's tied 5, Keith, before we move on to Ulster. I want to get your thoughts briefly on. Brian O'Driscoll was on Monday, was saying it's a potential area of weakness now, especially when they get into the business end of competitions. Obviously, Sneeman and his injury is a big blow, and Jean Klein's injured as well at the moment. Munster's tight 5 and how they can mix it with the best sides. Is that a serious area of concern for you?
I don't know. It's a serious area of concern. I think the front row can mix it pretty well. I think it isn't just in the contact at the scrum. It's also in the line out. It's also in the maul. I'd like Munster's maul defence to be better, definitely. I think with Tadhg Byrne back, there seems to be a higher level of flexibility on the line out options. I thought Wycherley did incredibly well, and we have to start trusting the young guys that are coming through, and injury throws you into that mix. He's going to grow up very, very quickly in this game. This is a very big game for him, but he's got something about him too, and it is about how the front row and second row combine properly at scrum time to make certain that there's not too much pressure on them, that the back row gets stuck in with them as well. So if the pack operate as a pack at scrum time, they can protect each other. They can gain the experience as the game goes along. They can understand you, like you're learning in real time almost with some of these things. But I'm not that worried by them. I'm a bit upset to see Killer getting injured because he's a big ball carrier. So I would say there are not great ball carriers for the most part in the front five. That's an area of weakness. You're looking for other players to step up.
So prediction time then, because I do want to get your thoughts on Ulster. I think, Rory, you said it's hard to see past Leinster. I think, Keith, ultimately, we throw around all these various different arguments and talking points, and what kind of looms large is the point you made almost at the outset, that it's just that bit harder for Munster to score, and you just suspect Leinster will find a way.
Yeah, I mean, Leinster are favourites, comfortable favourites, I would say, even though they only won by 2 points a couple of weeks ago. But I see that Munster have a very big game in them. And when you're able to put all your eggs into this basket and they decide that they go all out for this in every way, shape or form, can they do that and keep the composure? And if they can, I think it becomes one of the great games. And that's what I'm hoping for. And I think they have an opportunity to win.
Okay, we'd certainly take one of the great games. Rory, what kind of margin are you nodding towards Leinster?
I mean, when you think the Connacht, the two players sent off in the first 35 minutes of the weekend, and you think how much could go wrong, it's got the margins are quite difficult. I think Leinster could be quite comfortable towards the end if they get things right. I think they have the capacity to dominate. I expect them to learn from the line-out issues and get the aerial stuff right. Even if Larmour's there, we've seen him get it right before. Say the first game of the World Cup, he started against Scotland. He was very good in that area. He can do it. So I think they'll be more comfortable. And I just think sometimes, to touch on what Keith said there, Munster become very reliant on CJ Stander. And if say someone like Will Connors takes Stander and basically man marks him and just they meet him at the line and he doesn't get the go forward ball, like Leinster have gang tackled him out of the game before. Then it's going to be a very difficult evening for Munster. So I think Leinster could, be 7+ anyway and comfortable enough towards the end.
Okay. Edinburgh Ulster's on Saturday evening. If lockdown has interrupted the momentum of any team, it's certainly Ulster, Keith. I mean, they were flying for much of this season on the back of last season and just a bit slow out of the blocks thus far. But I mean, it's not like they have much time to get going. The news is that Jacob Stockdale, Stuart McCluskey and Jordy Murphy are all doubts for the game. We're still waiting on confirmation to see if they can make it. I mean, geez, if you lose Stockdale and McCluskey and Addison is already out, that pretty much negates the back line, which has got them into these kind of positions.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it's been interesting watching them. There were a huge amount of calls for Cooney to usurp Murray earlier on in the season, and pretty good calls too, by the way, because Cooney was on fire playing behind a pack of forwards who were putting the ball on a plate for him, and he was playing with a high level of confidence. That energy hasn't been evident in the last couple of weeks. That's the thing that's got it, not necessarily from him, but from the team around him. So I feel he has suffered a little bit because of it. He hasn't been in that commanding performance. I thought Madigan at the weekend was taking the ball very deep, and it's very hard when your 10 takes it deep and he's passing it flat or deep to get over the gain line. And it just felt as if can't say they were going through the motions, because that's not right either. They just have taken much longer to get into the tempo. So what has been very interesting is Munster and Leinster's accuracy and pace has been, for the most part, very high. And that wasn't evident and hasn't been evident with Ulster so far. So they need to get to the match pace very, very quickly, because they need to bring it from the very start. And they seem to be kind of feeling their way to get into a game. And they just haven't looked like a huge threat. And even McCluskey, and I'm a fan of McCluskey's too, and he takes a risk, and I like that at times. I don't know whether I'd necessarily like it if I was a coach, but a lot of his risks he's taking are going to ground, and earlier on in the year they weren't. They were going to hand. So it's whatever it's required, I think, at this stage. But they need their energy. They need, if they don't turn up with energy at the game, they're going to suffer.
I mean, they were through to the semi-finals before they even played the last two games, Rory, and you know, McFarlane talked about them losing the first game on the couch, but geez, this better jolt them into some kind of action, because otherwise it's a very anticlimactic, meek way to bow out.
Yeah, they're chasing a bit now, aren't they? And that's a big concern. It's kind of, you know, this window is so short. There's 4 weeks to win a title, kind of unique situation that we've got. I mean, they were hampered by the fact that it was a COVID cluster in their academy last week, and they had to stand down training. And you know, up until I think Thursday, the game was in doubt, and they hadn't trained together. So that probably did feed into the inaccuracy of their performance. But I don't think they were looking for excuses afterwards. And regardless of that, they kind of have to figure out a way of performing. That's 2 games in a row now they've been well short, and it should really hurt their pride that Leinster are able to make 15 changes and still hammer them. You know, I know they got back in it in the second half, but like John Cooney, as Keith touched on, like he picked up an injury during lockdown, as far as I know, and it seems to have hampered him coming back. He definitely doesn't look as sharp, and I would have been one of the people calling for him to replace Murray during the Six Nations. But if you were picking an Ireland team now, I would say Luke McGrath and Kieran Marmion are ahead of him right now, never mind Conor Murray. So there's a lot of players in there who haven't clicked, and I know Murrayfield, when it has like 1,000 or 2,000 people in it, is never the most intimidating place to go. It's hardly going to be, very intimidating this Saturday. So it's a nice track. It's a big game. There's all the incentive is there to perform, but you just don't want to be chasing it. You don't want to be forcing it. And like the amount of errors that they made last Saturday, that really professional rugby players shouldn't be making, that has to be a major concern for Dan McFarlane. That they just haven't seemed to got this window right at all, and it's going to be very hard to turn that on this weekend.
Okay, well, we will see. Keith Wood, Ruaidhri O'Connor, enjoy the games over the weekend, fellas. Thanks so much.
Cheers, gents.
Thanks, guys.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.